My name is Claire. And on April 18th, I learned exactly how dangerous it can be when a spoiled heir thinks the world owes him obedience. It started like any other Thursday morning. I was in my office by 7 a.m., coffee in one hand, organizing the quarterly reports for our biggest client. The same client who had practically saved the company from bankruptcy last year. That's when the door slammed open. Nathaniel Carter, 19 years old, son of our CEO, heir to a company he had never worked a single honest day for. He marched in, designer suit hanging awkwardly on his lanky frame, eyes blazing with the kind of fury only a spoiled child can muster when someone dares tell them no. "You think you can ignore me?" he barked, slamming his fist on my desk. "When I give an order, you follow it." I stayed seated, calm, professional. "Nathaniel, I don't take orders from interns." His face turned red. "I'm the future CEO. You'll regret this." I raised an eyebrow. "Then I'll deal with you when you're actually the CEO. Until then." I gestured politely toward the door. "Please leave my office." I knew brushing him off like that would come back to bite me. I just didn't expect it to be that same night. Let me take you back a few months before that morning. When our CEO, Richard Carter, announced his son would be joining the company for experience, most of us assumed Nathaniel would spend a few weeks shadowing departments before getting bored and vanishing back to whatever luxury resort he'd crawled out of. We were wrong. Nathaniel was handed the title of Junior Operations Director, a title I'd earned after 5 years of blood, sweat, and late nights, with no actual qualifications and no understanding of how our company worked. And somehow, in his mind, that meant I was supposed to take orders from him. At first, I played along. I corrected his mistakes quietly. I fixed his disastrous proposals before they reached clients. I even covered for him when he missed deadlines. Why? Because I valued my career. Because I believed in this company. And maybe because I thought he'd grow up. I was wrong about that too. The breaking point came 2 weeks before that Thursday morning. Nathaniel barged into my office, tossed a file on my desk, and said, "Fire the Johnson team. They annoyed me." The Johnson team, my team, had just secured a $3.5 million contract for the company. "I'm not firing anyone because they annoyed you," I said, keeping my voice calm. His response? "I'll tell my father you refused a direct order." I met his gaze without flinching. "Go ahead." He stormed out. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought his father would knock some sense into him. But I'd underestimated how far entitlement would go. On the night of the annual spring gala, I was representing our international clients, the same division I'd built from scratch over 6 years. Everything felt perfect. The venue glittered. The investors were pleased. For a moment, I let myself believe hard work actually counted for something. And then, my phone buzzed. One text. From Richard Carter. "Claire, please come to my office first thing tomorrow morning." I felt my stomach twist. I barely slept that night. By 7:30 a.m., I was standing in front of Richard's desk. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Claire, I'm afraid I have to." But before he could finish, I leaned in. "Check your inbox first." His face went deathly pale. Because what he didn't know? I'd been documenting everything. Richard Carter stared at his screen like it was a live grenade. The color drained from his face. He clicked once, twice. Opened the folder I'd quietly sent him the night before. Inside were 43 forwarded emails. Every single one from Nathaniel. Some were laughable, some borderline illegal. There was Nathaniel ordering departments to falsify delivery reports, Nathaniel demanding the finance team adjust numbers to make his forecasts look good, Nathaniel emailing me directly with gems like, "Just do what I say or I'll make sure you're out." I stood silently, letting Richard take it all in. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, a deep sigh escaping his lips. "I had no idea." I folded my arms. "Didn't you?" He flinched, because the truth was, he had known, at least part of it. But turning a blind eye is easier when it's your golden boy acting out. Easier until the proof lands in your inbox. Richard buried his head in his hands. Claire, why didn't you come to me sooner? I kept my voice level. Because I thought this company believed in merit. And because I didn't want to be the reason your family imploded. He looked up, eyes sharp with something between guilt and fear. My board can never see this. I gave him a hard look. I'm not here to threaten you, Richard. I'm here because your son walked into my office yesterday morning and demanded I fire a team that just saved you $3.5 million. And when I refused, he promised to destroy my career. I paused, letting that sink in. I came here because I won't let a 19-year-old brat treat people like garbage while you look the other way. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the low hum of the air conditioner. Then Richard whispered, "What do you want?" I smiled, just slightly. I want my career. I want the Johnson team protected. I want this nonsense to stop before it blows up in your face. And Nathaniel? That's your problem. I left Richard's office with my heart pounding. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about justice, about making sure hard work still mattered. But by Monday morning, I realized Nathaniel wasn't going to let it go. It started with whispers, emails I was suddenly left off, meetings rescheduled without me, budget approvals delayed, the subtle art of corporate sabotage. I caught Nathaniel smirking outside a strategy meeting I'd been excluded from. He actually winked at me. Here's the thing about entitled people like Nathaniel. They think power is a game they can rig. What they never realize is, sometimes the people they try to step on are the ones holding the foundation together. A week later, Richard called me back in. You're right, he said quietly. Nathaniel's out of control. I raised an eyebrow. Good. So you've spoken with him? Richard looked away. I tried. He won't listen. He told me if I don't get rid of you, he'll go to the board and cause trouble. I actually laughed. 19 years old and threatening board action? Impressive. Richard didn't laugh. Claire, I'm afraid I have to suspend you. Temporarily, just to calm him down. It's not personal. I stared at him, stone cold. It's never personal, is it? He winced. I'll make it right. I promise, but I already knew. He wasn't going to stand up to his son. He was going to sacrifice me, the person who built his international division, because it was easier. I nodded politely and walked out of his office with my head high. But I wasn't defeated, because Richard had no idea. I'd been preparing for this moment for months. Walking out of Richard Carter's office that morning, I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised. I'd learned long ago that in corporate life, loyalty often dissolves under pressure, especially when family's involved. But what Nathaniel and his father didn't realize was I wasn't standing alone. Because while they were busy plotting my exit, I'd been building something else entirely. 3 months before Nathaniel stormed into my office, I'd noticed things shifting. Clients were getting nervous. Senior managers were asking strange questions. And several high-level partnerships, ones I had personally negotiated, were suddenly being reassigned. It didn't take a genius to realize Nathaniel was positioning himself. He wanted to control the international division I'd built from scratch. And Richard was letting him. So I did the one thing they didn't expect. I started documenting everything. Every email, every meeting note, every client concern about Nathaniel's behavior. I had a clean, organized record of every reckless decision he made and every cover-up attempt Richard allowed. But I wasn't stupid enough to keep that information to myself. I reached out to 2 people I trusted more than anyone in the company. Marta Chen, our head of compliance, and David Alvarez, our senior legal counsel. Both of them had worked alongside me for years. Both of them had quietly expressed concerns about Nathaniel's behavior. Over coffee, off the record, I laid out everything I had. At first, Marta shook her head. Claire, this is a career-ending mess. David agreed. If the board sees this, I met their eyes. They need to see this. Not for me. For the company. There was a long pause. Then Marta leaned in. I'm with you. David nodded. Me too. That's when the real work began. We spent late nights cross-referencing contracts Nathaniel had meddled with. We tracked compliance violations that could have triggered investigations. David drafted confidential memos outlining potential breaches of fiduciary duty and who could be held responsible. Marta discovered that one of Nathaniel's special projects had nearly put us in violation of international trade laws. Had I not intervened quietly 2 months earlier, the fallout could have sunk the company. By the time Richard called me in to suspend me, I wasn't worried, because the board wasn't going to hear about Nathaniel's misconduct from me. They were going to hear it from their own compliance and legal departments. But that wasn't all. The final piece of the puzzle was our largest international client, Eastbridge Global Holdings. I'd built that relationship personally, and I knew for a fact they had serious concerns about Nathaniel after a disastrous meeting he'd led without me. So I reached out to Michelle Tan, their head of partnerships. We met for lunch. No pressure, no agenda. But when I casually asked about their plans for future contracts, Michelle gave me a knowing look. Claire, off the record? If you're gone, so are we. I blinked. Seriously? She nodded. We don't work with companies run by amateurs. That was all I needed. By the time my suspension hit the internal email list, 2 things happened simultaneously. Marta and David submitted their joint report directly to the board, and Eastbridge Global sent a formal letter of concern to Richard Carter, with a not-so-subtle warning about withdrawing future business if leadership changes weren't made. I wish I could say I felt triumphant. But honestly, I just felt ready. Because Nathaniel Carter had spent months thinking he could push me out with empty threats and childish tantrums. What he didn't understand was simple. You can't bully people who have nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The official notice hit company-wide email at 9:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. Claire Patterson, administrative leave, pending internal review. No explanation, no details. Just a cold, sterile sentence announcing that I was, for all intents and purposes, out. But what Richard Carter didn't know, the review had already started, and it wasn't about me. At 10:05 a.m., Marta and David submitted their joint report directly to the board of directors. It wasn't dramatic. No accusations, no finger-pointing. Just cold, hard facts. Nathaniel Carter had attempted to manipulate financial data on multiple occasions. He had issued directives outside of his authority, risking contractual violations. He had interfered with compliance procedures, and Richard Carter, by omission or willful ignorance, had allowed it to continue. The report ended with a simple recommendation. We advise immediate review of leadership accountability and potential breaches of fiduciary duty. By 11:30 a.m., the boardroom was in lockdown. I wasn't there, of course, but Marta kept me updated via text. Richard looks like he's aged 10 years in an hour. Nathaniel tried to blame you. Didn't go well. Board isn't buying it. They want answers. I read every message with a strange sense of calm. I hadn't leaked anything to the board myself. I hadn't gone public. I didn't have to. The truth had its own way of rising. Around 2 p.m., Richard called me. I let it go to voicemail. He tried again. By the 3rd call, I picked up. Claire, I think we need to talk. I let him sweat for a moment. About my suspension? He exhaled sharply. About everything. We met in his office late that afternoon. For once, Nathaniel wasn't hovering in the background. Richard looked hollow. The confident CEO mask was gone. The board wants to meet with you tomorrow morning, he said quietly. I nodded. And? He hesitated. They've asked for Nathaniel's immediate resignation, and for me to step down temporarily pending review. I didn't flinch. Sounds appropriate. Richard gave me a bitter smile. You really did it. You destroyed him. I met his gaze steadily. I didn't destroy anyone. Nathaniel did that himself. I just refused to cover it up. For a moment, I thought he'd explode, but instead, he slumped forward. "You were the best we had," he whispered. "I should have backed you." I stayed silent, because in that moment, there was nothing left to say. The next morning, I walked into the boardroom I'd never been invited to before. 12 directors, cold eyes, serious faces. But when I sat down, something shifted. They didn't grill me. They didn't accuse. They asked for my perspective. And I gave it to them. Professionally, calmly, backed with facts. I told them about the deals I'd negotiated, the partnerships I'd protected, the risks I'd mitigated that Nathaniel's recklessness had created. I watched as heads nodded around the table. By the end of that meeting, the chairman leaned forward. "Claire, we'd like you to consider stepping into an interim leadership role for the international division while we restructure." I could hardly believe it. I wasn't just reinstated, I was promoted. But even as I shook hands and smiled politely, a part of me stayed guarded. Because promotions come and go. Titles shift. Power is temporary. But respect? That's earned. And it's the one thing Nathaniel Carter would never get back. 2 weeks after that board meeting, Nathaniel Carter was gone. No farewell email. No announcement. Just gone. I heard whispers he'd been shipped off to manage family investments overseas. In other words, they banished him quietly to avoid scandal. And Richard Carter? He stepped down voluntarily, citing personal reasons. The company's internal memo thanked him for his service and highlighted his commitment to future transition efforts. Corporate speak for, "We won't fire you publicly if you disappear quietly." On my first official day as interim director of international operations, I walked past Nathaniel's old corner office. Empty. Just a nameplate lying on the desk. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. Because this wasn't about proving a point. It was about protecting the people who'd been risking their careers under his chaotic shadow. I called my team together for a meeting. No fancy speeches, no victory laps. Just one simple promise. I don't care about titles or last names. I care about work, integrity, and respect. That's how we move forward. Together. And for the first time in weeks, I saw real relief on their faces. A month later, Eastbridge Global renewed their contract. Not because we begged them, but because Michelle Tan called me personally and said, "We want to work with leaders who know what they're doing. That's you." Other clients followed. Deals started closing again. Stability returned. The company didn't just recover, it started thriving. Then came the final twist. The board invited me for a private dinner. I wasn't sure what to expect. But sitting there, across from people who once viewed me as just another department head, I realized something had changed. They weren't looking at me as a placeholder anymore. They were looking at me as a leader. The chairman spoke first. "Claire, we'd like to offer you the permanent role of Vice President of International Operations, effective immediately." I paused, letting that sink in. "I have conditions," I said quietly. He smiled. "Let's hear them." And I laid them out. 0 tolerance for nepotism in leadership roles. Transparent accountability standards for all executives. Full authority to build and protect my team. My way. The chairman nodded after each one. "Agreed." I signed the contract a week later. Not for the title, not even for the raise, but because I wanted to make sure no one else would have to fight the same battles I did, just to be treated with basic dignity. And Nathaniel? The last I heard, he was working on some startup in Singapore, burning through his trust fund and trying to impress investors who saw right through him. Funny how that works. When you build your world on entitlement and fear, it collapses the moment someone refuses to play along. Looking back, I realized something. Nathaniel tried to destroy my career because I didn't follow his orders. Richard tried to sacrifice me to save himself. But neither of them understood the truth about power. Real power doesn't come from titles or threats. It comes from competence, character, and the people who trust you to lead them well. And that's something no spoiled heir and no cowardly CEO can ever fake. I still remember the moment she walked in. Heels clicking, lips tight, attitude already filling the hallway before she even spoke. It was a Monday morning. I was at my desk, as usual, sorting through the latest client schedules, confirming lunch reservations, preparing the briefing notes for the weekly ops meeting. Things that didn't show up on a balance sheet, but made everything run smoothly. For the last 13 years, I'd been the executive assistant to Richard Langston, the founder and CEO of Langston and Company, a mid-sized but fiercely respected consulting firm in Chicago. Richard built the company from the ground up. I joined in year 2, back when we worked out of a shared office space with a broken coffee machine and only 4 clients to our name. I've watched that company grow through economic slumps, legal battles, and 2 rebrands. I was there for every single one. So when the elevator doors opened and I saw her, Melanie Langston, his 28-year-old daughter, I felt something shift. She didn't greet me, didn't make eye contact. She walked past my desk like I was just a part of the decor, which, to be fair, was better than what came next. "Sarah, right?" she said as she turned back, sunglasses still on. "You're the secretary?" I smiled politely. "Executive assistant to the CEO." She smirked. "Right. Well, that position won't be necessary anymore. I'm restructuring. We're aiming for a more modern dynamic. Agile, flat hierarchy. You know." I blinked. "I'm sorry? You've been here? How long? 10 years?" 13, I said quietly. 13, she repeated, like it was something to be embarrassed about. "That's a lot of time behind a desk, but we're moving in a different direction. Effective immediately, your role is redundant." I stared at her, heart thudding in my ears. Was this real? No warning, no meeting, no explanation. Just a cold dismissal on a Monday morning. Still, I smiled. Calm, controlled. After all, you don't survive over a decade in corporate America without learning the value of silence. "No problem," I said. Melanie looked momentarily confused by how quickly I accepted it. No drama, no begging, no tears. "Great," she said, waving a manicured hand. "Pack up before lunch and HR will be in touch about your final paycheck." And just like that, she turned and disappeared into her new glass office, Richard's old office. I sat there for a moment, processing. Not because I didn't see it coming. Richard had been hinting for months that he was grooming her to take over. But I didn't expect that. Not the way she did it. Not the sheer lack of respect. I packed in silence. My coworkers glanced over but didn't dare say anything. Some looked away. A few looked sorry. I didn't blame them. It's hard to fight for someone when the person holding the sword is the boss's daughter. By noon, I was gone. I drove home in silence, heart pounding harder with every red light. Not because I was afraid, at least not just that, but because I knew things. Things Melanie didn't. Like how the client list was organized, how contracts were filed, which contacts required handwritten thank you notes, which clients needed monthly check-ins, and which ones would walk away if they didn't hear a familiar voice on the phone. I had been the quiet engine behind that company. Not flashy, not loud, but essential. And now I was out. Just like that. I didn't cry, not even once. Instead, I made tea, opened my laptop, and began to think about every client I had nurtured, every partner I had liaised with, every meeting I had prepared, sometimes single-handedly saving Richard's neck from major fallout. Melanie had made one crucial mistake. She underestimated me. She thought I was just a secretary, replaceable, irrelevant. But the thing is, when you pull a thread that's been holding the whole structure together, the unraveling doesn't happen instantly. It starts slow, subtle, but when it happens, it's unstoppable. And I had just been cut loose, with every name, every phone number, and every quiet secret tucked away in my personal notebook. She had no idea what was coming. Not yet. But she would. The next morning, I woke up early, out of habit more than necessity. For 13 years, my internal clock had been trained to rise before the sun, beat the inbox flood, and anticipate problems before anyone else even noticed them forming. But now, I didn't have a job, no commute, no meeting agendas to prep, just silence and an empty to-do list. Except that wasn't entirely true. Because Melanie Langston may have fired me, but what she didn't realize was that I didn't leave empty-handed. Not in the malicious sense. No documents or stolen property. I had too much integrity for that. But what I did have was my notebook. It was a plain leather-bound journal, the kind you buy in packs of 3 from office supply stores. I had filled dozens over the years, jotted notes, reminders, observations, and most importantly, relationship maps. Not just names and numbers, but who mattered to who. Which client hated being called before 10 a.m.? Which one only signed contracts on Wednesdays? Who preferred handwritten notes over emails? Which vendor once flew across the country just to meet Richard for lunch? And who did it out of obligation rather than loyalty? Melanie didn't ask about any of that. She never even glanced at my desk when she let me go. She thought she could just slide in, change the job titles, and the machine would keep running. But a company isn't a machine. It's a living, breathing ecosystem of relationships. And she had just severed the root system. By Wednesday, 2 days after my firing, I received my first call. It was from Gary Abrams, the head of acquisitions at Deerwood Financial, a client we had retained for over 9 years. "Sarah," he said, voice warm and confused. "We just got an automated email from some intern about the quarterly report. Is everything okay?" I paused. "They didn't notify you?" "About what?" "I'm no longer with Langston and Company." There was a silence on the other end. "You're kidding." "No." "Is Richard okay? Why would he?" "It was his daughter," I said simply. Gary grunted. "Melanie, she's in charge now?" "Yes." Another pause. "Well, that explains the mess. Listen, I don't want to get into the politics of it, but we trusted you. You were the reason we stuck around this long." "I appreciate that." "Number, I mean it. You made things work. You always got things done." We talked for another few minutes. He didn't come out and say he was pulling the account, but he didn't have to. I could hear it in his tone. That first crack. By Thursday, I got 3 more calls, then 2 emails. By Friday afternoon, I had heard from 7 clients. All confused, all disoriented. Some were angry, one furious, that Melanie had reassigned their account to someone who mispronounced their name in a Zoom call. "I thought we mattered to you," one message read. I didn't reply. I couldn't. I didn't work there anymore. But I logged each message in a new notebook. By Friday evening, I received a text from Nicole, a former coworker from the strategy team. She had always been kind, even when others treated me like I was invisible. "Hey, can I call you? Something's happening here." I replied, "Of course." 10 minutes later, my phone lit up. "Sarah," she said quickly, "Melanie's freaking out." "Why?" 3 of our top 5 clients have gone dark. No replies, no calls. One canceled a review meeting without rescheduling. She's pacing like a lion in a cage. I said nothing. She's blaming everyone. Claims the assistant she promoted doesn't know what she's doing. Shock of the century. But you know what she's not doing? What? She's not taking responsibility. She just keeps saying, "We'll win them back with innovation." Nicole laughed bitterly. "Sarah, she doesn't even know who to call. You were the only one who had personal rapport with most of them. She just assumed they'd stick around because the company name meant something." I stayed quiet for a long moment. Then, "Have you spoken to Richard?" "Not directly. He's out of town. Melanie told everyone she's cleaning house and taking the company into the next era. I could almost picture her saying it. Probably while wearing a power suit and giving someone an unearned lecture on synergy. Nicole's voice softened. People here miss you. I miss them too. We hung up after a few more updates, and I sat on the couch, the house still and quiet around me. Melanie thought I was irrelevant. But here's the thing about people like her. They mistake visibility for value. They think if you're not the one giving the speeches or closing the deals on paper, you don't matter. But I mattered. And by the time Monday rolled around again, she'd know just how much. Because I hadn't made a single call. I didn't rally any troops. I hadn't said a word to a single client about my firing. They were walking away all on their own. All I had to do was wait, and listen, and document. Because the avalanche had started. And Melanie? She was standing right in its path. By Monday morning, it wasn't just a ripple. It was a wave. I hadn't set foot in the office since Melanie fired me. I hadn't sent any messages or warned anyone. Still, the company's once steady heartbeat had turned erratic. I could feel it without even being there. At 9:46 a.m., Nicole texted again. 3 more clients pulled out. Melanie's losing it. I stared at the screen and let the words sink in. In just 1 week, 6 major accounts had either gone quiet or formally severed ties. I opened my notebook and flipped to the names. These weren't just any clients. They were the firm's backbone. Each account worth hundreds of thousands annually. And each one had a deep history with Langston and Company. And with me. And yet Melanie hadn't bothered to reach out to a single one personally. Because why would she? In her mind, success was inherited. Respect was assumed. Loyalty was automatic. She never understood the truth. Loyalty is earned in the quiet moments. On late-night calls, handwritten notes, rescheduled meetings during snowstorms, remembered birthdays, and the quiet assurance that someone, somewhere, is keeping the train on the tracks. That was me, and I was gone. I received an unexpected email around 10:15 a.m. It was from one of our former vendors, Thomas, who provided analytics dashboards for several key clients. Subject line, just checking in. Hey Sarah, I just heard what happened. Melanie reached out to us Friday. Said you left for personal reasons. That didn't sound like you. I just wanted to say I always appreciated your professionalism. Hope you're okay. Thomas, I replied briefly, thanked him and wished him well. I didn't need to defend myself. The silence from Langston and Company was doing that for me. At noon, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered, expecting another vendor or former colleague. Sarah. A deep, familiar voice said, "What the hell is going on?" It was Richard, the original CEO, Melanie's father. I straightened instinctively, even though I was home in leggings with a half-eaten sandwich on the table. Hello, Richard. I just landed an hour ago, he said. And my phone hasn't stopped ringing. Clients, partners, even one of our competitors. They're saying we've gone dark, that Melanie's made some sort of power play, and that you're gone? I paused. She fired me last Monday, said my position was no longer needed. There was a long silence. She what? She called me just a secretary. Another pause. I imagined him rubbing his temples the way he always did when stressed. She told me she was planning a reorg. I thought that meant streamlining some mid-level management, not firing the most trusted person in the building. You trusted me, I said. She didn't. I can't even begin to explain how furious I am, he said. And the clients... God, Sarah, I had no idea you had that kind of connection with them. They're not just clients. They're relationships. And they noticed when I disappeared. He sighed deeply. How many have we lost? I don't know the final count, but last I heard, at least 6 of the top 10 were reconsidering. She never even looked at the client ledger, he muttered. I can't believe I left the company in her hands. You left it in her hands without giving her the tools to understand it. Another silence. Then, where are you right now? Home? Stay there. Don't speak to anyone else about this. I need to see it for myself. He hung up. I sat quietly, trying to slow my pulse. There was a storm coming. Not the frantic kind, but the silent, calculated kind. The kind that shakes foundations. And I wasn't at the center of it anymore. I was the catalyst. At 3 p.m., I got another message from Nicole. Melanie just locked herself in her office. Legal is here. Something's happening. At 4:12 p.m., Richard called again. She didn't tell me anything, he said. No greeting this time. Didn't mention the firings, didn't warn me about the accounts. But you know what really hit me? What? She had no idea how the contracts were set up. You weren't just a secretary. You were listed on 4 client agreements as the point of contact. Some of them only signed because you were involved. I know. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because I didn't need the credit. I just wanted the work to matter. There was a pause. His voice softened. It always did. I see that now. He sighed again, longer this time. She's not equipped for this. I didn't respond. Then finally, Sarah, what would it take for you to come back? I closed my eyes and let the question linger, because what I wanted wasn't just an apology. It was a reckoning. I didn't answer Richard's question right away. What would it take for you to come back? He asked it with urgency, but I let the silence linger. I knew he was pacing. I knew his mind was racing, trying to hold on to the remains of the company he'd built. Finally, I said, if I do come back, it won't be to sit quietly behind a desk. Name your terms, he replied without hesitation. Full decision-making authority over client services, I said, reporting directly to you. I want my title changed. I want access to all the reports and client data. And I want it in writing that Melanie will not have any authority over my work. There was a pause. Short, but telling. I can make that happen, he said. I'm not done, I continued. I want to implement a new onboarding system for staff, something we should have done years ago. I want a say in hiring, and I want Melanie to issue a formal internal statement acknowledging her error. Another pause. That last part might be difficult. I know, but if I'm coming back to clean up this mess, I want everyone to know exactly why the mess happened in the first place. He let out a slow breath. Understood. I knew then that he didn't just want me back. He needed me. Not out of guilt or loyalty, but out of cold, hard business necessity. The structure was crumbling, and I was the only one who still knew where the beams were. The next morning, I got an official email. Interim Director of Client Services. Immediate effect. Reporting directly to the CEO. Attached was the contract, signed and scanned. Everything I'd asked for. I arrived at the office just after 11 a.m. I didn't use the side entrance. I walked straight through the main lobby, heels clicking sharply across the marble floor. Every head turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. People watched me the way one might watch a phoenix walk back into the ashes. Nicole met me at the elevator. She looked like she wanted to hug me, but settled for a quiet nod. She's in the conference room, she whispered. Good. Richard was already inside when I stepped in. So was Melanie. She looked like a ghost. Pale, shoulders tense, jaw clenched so tightly you could hear it creak. A couple of department heads sat along the far wall, unsure whether to stand or sink into their chairs. I walked to the head of the table and placed my bag down calmly. Richard gestured for me to sit beside him. Melanie's eyes locked on me like I was a ghost she'd hoped never to see again. Richard cleared his throat. As some of you are aware, we've had a few operational disruptions. Disruptions? Melanie snapped. They're calling it a mass client exodus. Richard didn't flinch. Whatever we call it, we're responding now. Sarah has agreed to return in a leadership capacity. Effective immediately, Melanie's mouth dropped open slightly. What? You made a call without understanding the structure beneath it, he said bluntly. Now you're seeing the results. Sarah has the experience we need to regain control. This is not up for debate. Melanie laughed bitterly. She's a secretary, or did we all forget that? No, I said, locking eyes with her. You forgot that I was the bridge between your clients and your contracts. You forgot that I knew them. Not just their names, but their patterns, their expectations, their values. And most of all, you forgot that companies don't thrive on hierarchy. They thrive on trust. She stood abruptly. So what? You're here to humiliate me? No, I replied. I'm here to save what's left. Melanie looked at her father. You're really letting her do this? I'm not letting her, he said. I'm asking her, and you should be grateful she said yes. There was a long, excruciating silence. Melanie didn't sit back down. She turned and walked out. The door closed behind her with a soft but final click. Richard turned to the others. We'll be issuing a statement this afternoon to our remaining clients. Sarah will be the point of contact for all retention efforts. The department heads nodded. Some looked visibly relieved. I stood. I'll need access to all the communications logs from the last 3 weeks. I want to know exactly where we stand. Richard nodded. It's yours. I left the conference room with purpose, my pulse calm but steady. Melanie had walked in a week ago thinking she could wipe the slate clean and rebuild from scratch. But she had no idea that the foundation she demolished was the only thing keeping the company upright. And now, I was the one holding the pieces. But I wasn't putting them back the way they were. I was building something stronger, something better. And she was officially on the outside. Over the next 48 hours, I barely looked up from my desk. The first step was stabilizing what was left. My inbox had turned into a battlefield. Clients confused, nervous, some angry. Others had gone completely silent, and that was worse. I knew the signs. Silence meant conversations were already happening with competitors. I reached out personally. No canned messages, no marketing fluff. I wrote each email myself, tailoring them with the kind of detail that only comes from years of real connection. Birthdays, kids' names, client-specific frustrations I had resolved at 11 p.m. on weekends. I wasn't just asking them to stay. I was reminding them why they had chosen us in the first place. By the end of day 2, I'd spoken to 14 clients. 9 of them confirmed they were open to renegotiation. 5 were non-committal, but I could tell I'd at least bought us time. It was more than Melanie had managed in a week. Nicole came by that afternoon with 2 cups of coffee. You look like you haven't blinked since this morning. I probably haven't. She hesitated before setting the cup down. I don't mean to stir the pot, but Melanie's been telling people she was the one who asked you to come back. I smiled faintly. Let her. You're not going to correct it? I don't need to. People are watching. They can see who's actually fixing things. Nicole nodded slowly. Still, it's pathetic. That's desperation, I said, and desperation always leaves a trail. Later that evening, I was in the conference room when Richard walked in. He looked older than I remembered, more worn. The weight of the week had settled in his shoulders. How bad is it? He asked. Realistically? We've already lost close to 80% of our high-value accounts. If we don't salvage the rest in the next 10 days, we'll have to consider downsizing. Heavily. He exhaled sharply and sat down across from me. I never thought it would unravel this fast. Because you underestimated the glue. He looked up. You mean you? I didn't respond. He leaned forward. Sarah, I let my daughter run this company into the ground. I thought giving her the title would make her rise to it. But she used it like a shield. She didn't lead. She ruled. Titles don't make leaders, I said. Actions do. He nodded slowly. So what happens now? You let me finish what I started. You give me room to rebuild our reputation, and not just externally. Internally, too. Staff morale is in the basement. People are scared. They don't trust leadership right now. We can't sell stability to clients if our own house is chaos. He tilted his head. And Melanie? I don't need her gone, but I do need her out of my way. He gave a faint, tired smile. Consider it done. By the end of the week, we had launched a formal outreach campaign. Every team member was assigned a list of clients to call, guided by templates I created. Every interaction was documented, every concern tracked. We shifted focus away from excuses and toward accountability. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't viral. But it was real. And it was working. On Friday afternoon, I was reviewing a new draft contract when Melanie stormed into my office. Uninvited, red-faced, her voice sharp. You've been undermining me. I looked up, calm. Good afternoon, Melanie. Don't play nice. You've been erasing me, taking over everything. People look at you like you're the CEO. I'm just doing my job. You're doing my job. I'm the future of this company. No, I said evenly. You were the experiment. The future is still being decided. She laughed coldly. You think you've won because you got your little title and fixed a few contracts? I think I've been trusted. By the clients, by the staff, and by your father. Trust is not something you inherit, Melanie. It's something you earn. She glared at me, then stormed out. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I just turned back to the contract and kept working. Because when you know your worth, you don't need to prove it by shouting. You show it, every single day through results. And the results were becoming undeniable. By Monday morning, the company felt different. Not fixed, not yet, but different. The hallways had gone from dead quiet to cautiously alive. Staff meetings were no longer dominated by fear or silence. People were speaking up again. Department heads were submitting ideas instead of excuses. And when they passed me in the corridor, they nodded, not out of obligation, but recognition. They knew. They all knew now. I wasn't just the woman who once sat quietly behind a desk scheduling flights and fixing calendar overlaps. I was the one who had held this place together. The one who rebuilt what arrogance almost destroyed. And Melanie? She had grown quieter, colder. Her presence, once loud and commanding, had become a ghost in the background, seen but no longer felt. She wasn't fired, not officially, but she had been removed from decision-making. Her badge still worked. Her office still had her name on the door, but the trust was gone, and she could feel it. So could I. On Tuesday, Richard called me into his office. His expression was serious, but his eyes, tired as they were, held something I hadn't seen in weeks. Calm. He gestured for me to sit. We've stabilized, he began. Your numbers saved us. I reviewed the final client retention reports this morning. We managed to recover 60% of our lost accounts. I know. I spoke with most of them myself. He nodded. And the board knows that. They also know you wrote the internal recovery plan. You trained the interim client teams. You managed staff communications during one of the most volatile months we've ever had. I waited. He reached for a folder. Inside was a formal offer letter. I want you to stay on permanently as Chief Client Officer, executive title. You'll oversee all client relations strategy. Full autonomy. You'll report only to me. I looked down at the offer. The salary bump was generous. The benefits, upgraded. But none of that was why I said yes. I said yes because this time the title matched the truth. I stood and shook his hand. I'll accept, on one condition. He raised an eyebrow. Name it. I want to create a mentorship program. For women, for support staff, for people who've been seen as just something, just a secretary, just an assistant, just a junior. I want to make sure no one else is ever underestimated the way I was. His face broke into a full, rare smile. Consider it done. I left his office with the letter in hand and a fire in my chest. Not anger, not revenge. Purpose. That afternoon, as I was walking past the glass conference room where Melanie once held court, I saw her standing alone. She was staring out the window, arms crossed, her reflection half merged with the skyline. She turned when she noticed me. Her eyes were tired. No makeup, no posture, no pretense. Just a young woman who had mistaken authority for power and power for invincibility. "I know you think I don't deserve this office," she said quietly. "I don't think anything," I replied. "Deserve has nothing to do with it. It's about what you do once you're given a chance." She looked away. "You made me look weak." "No," I said, voice firm. "You did that all on your own. I just refused to cover for it." Silence filled the space between us. Then she asked, almost like a child, "Did you hate me?" "No," I answered truthfully. "I pitied you, because you walked into a legacy built by your father and never bothered to understand the people who helped build it." She didn't respond. I left her there. Later that evening, I sat in my new office. Glass walls, a view of the river, a nameplate that finally felt earned. I pulled out the old notebook from my bag. The one where it all started. Its pages were worn, ink fading in places, corners bent from years of flipping back and forth. I turned to the final page and wrote one last note. "It's not about the title on your door. It's about the trust behind it." Weeks passed. The company didn't just recover. It evolved. The mentorship program launched quietly but gained traction fast. Within months, we had tripled engagement scores. Former interns and assistants began stepping into new roles. Confidence spread like wildfire, and clients noticed. Because in the end, people don't stay loyal to logos or slogans or leadership charts. They stay loyal to people who show up when it matters most. And I had shown up. Even when I'd been told I was irrelevant. Even when I was discarded like office clutter. I hadn't burned the building down. I just let it collapse under the weight of its own arrogance. And when the dust settled, I didn't point fingers. I got to work. That's what real leadership looks like. And that's a legacy no one can take away.